Okay, let's just unpack this right out of the gate.
Yeah, let's dive in.
I want to start with a question today that it might sting a little bit for some of you listening,
Right?
but I think it's a necessary question given everything we are seeing in the cultural landscape right now.
Oh, absolutely.
It's one of those questions that I think a lot of guys specifically are asking themselves in the quiet moments. You know, at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep.
The 3 a.m. ceiling stare.
Exactly. Have you ever felt like you followed all the rules?
Right.
You know what I mean? You you worked hard, you kept your head down, you spoke the truth even when it was uncomfortable.
You took responsibility for your own screw ups.
Yes. But somehow, after doing all of that, you were still cast as the villain in the narrative.
It's that gnawing suspicion you get.
Yeah.
That the game isn't just rigged, but that the rules of the game have been completely rewritten while you weren't looking. You look around and think, wait a minute, I did everything I was told to do. So why does it feel like society is trying to diagnose me as the problem?
And to be clear, what we are exploring today is a very specific perspective on this feeling. We're doing a deep dive into a book that attempts to explain exactly why that shift happened.
Yeah, it's an absolute sledgehammer of a text.
It really is. It's called Stoic Wise Adaptation. Cognitive Flexibility, Virtue, and Radical Responsibility.
By Conrad Riker.
Right, by Conrad Riker. And before we go any further down this rabbit hole,
And it goes deep.
it goes incredibly deep. I need to give you all a mandatory call to action right now.
Yeah, please do.
If you appreciate us taking the time to cover heavy-hitting, controversial books like this, if you want this deep dive to keep bringing you this kind of analysis that you just are not going to hear in the mainstream, please hit that like and subscribe button right now.
It really helps us keep the lights on.
It keeps the algorithm from burying us, honestly.
And for this specific topic, you are going to want to go directly to the source material. We are going to cover a ton of ground today, but this book is dense. It is essentially pitched as a training manual for the modern man who wants to survive what Reichel calls this cultural shift.
Right. So if what we discussed today resonates with you, or even if you just want to understand the argument he's making, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy the ebook.
What we are doing today is just an overview. The full training, the actual mechanics of his argument are in the text.
You need to own this one to understand the full scope of what he's talking about.
And you can also follow the author for his ongoing analysis. He is at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
Right. Substack, Twitter, YouTube. Highly recommend checking this stuff out.
So let's set the stage for this deep dive.
Yeah, let's do it. Because this isn't a standard book review where we just talk about, literary themes or pacing.
No, not at all. Riker frames this more as a debriefing.
Or an autopsy.
An autopsy, exactly. An autopsy of Western civilization. Or at least the version of it that prioritized reason and logic over emotion.
And he makes it very clear who this book is for in the preface.
He does. He says it's for the learner. Capital L.
Right. The guy who suspects the ground is shifting beneath him. Riker is specifically tailoring this for men who feel like the modern world has basically declared war on them.
He's targeting men's rights activists, the red-pilled community, guys in the manosphere. Really anyone who looks at the news and thinks none of this makes any logical sense anymore.
But as we go through this, we want to make it clear to you, the listener, that our goal today is to neutrally report on Riker's claims.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing the viewpoints or taking a political side here.
We're just unpacking the arguments contained in the source material so you can understand what's driving this massive cultural conversation.
And Riker's tone in the book is intense. He explicitly states, I don't offer hope, I offer power.
Power, not hope.
Right. His central thesis is that what we are seeing isn't just everyday politics.
It's not about tax rates.
No. He argues it is a deliberate dismantling of the cognitive tools that built our institutions, specifically before he claims they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
He's saying the operating system of the West has been swapped out.
And if you are still running the old logic-based software, you are going to crash.
Okay, so let's get into the first segment of the outline here. Riker calls this the foundation, and he starts with what he terms the collapse of reason.
Yeah, he argues that to understand the chaos, you have to look at the absolute bedrock of how we think.
Right.
He claims that logic itself,
Just basic logic.
just basic logic, the mechanism we use to determine true from false, is now being classified by some institutions as a form of violence.
Okay, let's stop there, because when I read that, it sounds like hyperbole. How does he argue that a syllogism is violent?
Well, he points to specific case studies. For instance, he details a 2021 incident at Reed College.
What happened there?
According to the book, students actively protested and managed to shut down a formal logic course.
A formal logic course.
Yes. Their stated argument was that the strict binary rules of logic compromised their emotional safety. Riker notes they referred to syllogisms as colonial thought structures.
So because logic was formalized by ancient Greeks or Enlightenment thinkers, the argument is that using it is inherently oppressive.
That is exactly the dynamic Riker is highlighting. He says the new ideology views logic as an oppressor tool because it demands a single, objective answer.
It doesn't leave room for my truth versus your truth.
Right. And he cites another event at Oberlin College in 2020 where he describes students chanting, "Logic is violence."
Literally chanting that.
Literally chanting it to drown out a philosophy professor.
We're just reporting what's in the book here, but Riker uses these examples to claim there is a fundamental shift happening.
A shift from logos to pathos.
Explain that distinction for the listener.
Logos being reason, objective truth, the word, pathos being emotion, feeling, personal narrative. Riker's point is that the foundational tools of modern civilization, the thinking of Aristotle, Newton, Locke, are now being recategorized as epistemic violators.
Epistemic violators, that is a heavy term.
Epistemic relates to the nature of knowledge. So Riker argues that in this new framework, if you use facts to dismantle someone's emotional claim,
You aren't just winning a debate.
no, you are allegedly committing an act of aggression against their lived experience. You are violating their worldview with objective facts.
Okay, so he's looking at these college protests. But Riker argues this doesn't just stay in the liberal arts campus quad, right?
No, he says it bleeds directly into the curriculum and the institutions themselves. He calls this institutional capture.
Let's talk about Yale Law School. What does the book say is happening there?
Riker details a shift at Yale towards something called testimony-based jurisprudence.
Which means what exactly?
He explains it as a framework where a person's subjective personal view, their emotional truth, is given more weight than objective evidence.
In a law school.
In a law school, Riker argues this acts as a solvent for the entire legal system because the law is fundamentally supposed to determine objective reality.
So under this theory, if my personal truth says a crime happened and the physical facts say it didn't, the trauma is prioritized over the evidence.
That is the implication Riker is warning about. He says it turns the courtroom into a therapy session.
And he also claims this is hitting STEM fields, hard sciences.
Yes, he brings up an initiative at UC Berkeley called ethnomathematics.
Ethnomathematics.
According to the book, this program aims to replace traditional algebra with what they call culturally responsive numeracy narratives.
Okay, I have to ask, what is a numeracy narrative?
Riker cites a course prompt from this initiative that actually asks students to write poems about their feelings toward numbers rather than solving equations.
Poems about numbers.
Yes. The stated goal is to decolonize math. But Riker argues the result is a generation that can't identify a false dichotomy or solve a complex equation, but can perfectly articulate their emotional relationship to division.
And he connects this to the Harvard admissions changes too, right?
He does. He discusses Harvard's 2017 admissions rubric change, which he claims shifted to prioritize narrative equity.
Meaning trauma stories.
Right, trauma stories and identity struggles over raw analytical ability.
And Riker's conclusion from all this is pretty stark. He says this creates a gynocentric cult within academia.
That's his term for it. He argues that high-achieving young men, who he claims are often wired more for systemizing and logic rather than emotional storytelling, are fleeing academia because the currency has fundamentally changed.
Okay, so if logic is being pushed out, as Riker claims, what takes its place? That brings us to segment 2, the weaponization of emotion.
And this is where Riker takes a really interesting historical detour. He goes all the way back to 12th century France.
To talk about courtly love.
Exactly, the tradition of courtly love.
Which most people just think of as knights being polite, right? Opening doors, chivalry.
Right, it sounds romantic. But Riker analyzes it differently. He argues it was actually the beginning of a psychological surrender for men.
How so?
In the courtly love tradition, the knight essentially had to perform emotional hostage negotiation. He had to submit his logic and his agency to the emotional whims of a noble woman.
He puts her on a pedestal.
Yes, and debases himself to serve her, proving his worth by enduring her emotional tests.
And Riker's thesis is that this script never went away. It just evolved.
He argues it evolved into a modern cultural code where male logic is expected to submit to female emotion. He coins the term the female credibility spiral.
Break that down for us. What is the spiral?
Riker says it works like this. If a man uses logic to dissent against a woman, his dissent is instantly branded as misogyny. Meanwhile, her opinion is amplified not based on its factual merit, but based on her identity.
So he's saying her lived experience trumps his data.
That's the claim. Riker says that in this framework, if she feels unsafe because of his argument, he is deemed actually dangerous. There is no defense against a feeling.
And the man is expected to apologize for causing the feeling, even if his data was objectively correct.
Exactly. And the perfect case study Riker uses for this is the James Damore Google memo incident.
Oh, man. The Google memo. We have to talk about that.
Riker spends a lot of time on it because he views it as the Galileo moment of our modern era.
So for anyone who doesn't remember, Damore was an engineer at Google.
Right. And he wrote an internal memo meant for discussion. In it, he cited peer-reviewed biological studies suggesting that population-level differences in preferences,
like men being more interested in things and women being more interested in people on average.
yes, standard psychological findings. He suggested this might explain why there isn't a perfect 50-50 gender split in coding, rather than it just being pure systemic oppression.
But he was trying to solve Google's diversity problem using data.
Yes. But Riker focuses on the outcome. Was Damore rebutted with better scientific studies? No. He was fired.
And Riker argues he was fired because he violated that courtly love code you mentioned.
Exactly. Riker says Damore committed the ultimate modern sin. He spoke truth to emotion. He suggested biology was more powerful than the company's social engineering goals.
And the book points out that Google actually changed their internal guidelines around this time too, right?
Yeah, Riker notes that Google had a document called the 9 Principles of Engineering Excellence,
which prioritized logic and precision.
Right, and according to Riker, it was deleted because employees complained that it privileged logic over empathy.
Which Riker argues is a terrifying precedent for an engineering company.
Absolutely, because if you are building a bridge or a search algorithm, empathy doesn't make the math work.
And this leads into what Riker calls the death of merit. He claims this isn't just an abstract culture war. He says it has lethal consequences.
He terms it the competence crisis. To support this, he cites a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER.
What did the study find?
According to the book, the study showed that gender-mandated teams in STEM fields,
meaning teams forced to meet a quota, rather than selected purely on merit.
right, those teams made 19% more factual errors.
19%. That is a massive margin of error when you were talking about aerospace or medicine.
And speaking of aerospace, Riker brings up the NASA Artemis program.
The hatch incident. Let's cover that.
Riker details a simulation involving Canadian astronaut Christina Koch. In the simulation, she needed to close a hatch that required 85 pounds of force.
She couldn't do it.
She tried and failed. Tried again and failed.
Now, traditionally, physics doesn't care about representation. If you can't close the hatch, you fail the test.
But Riker claims that instead of upholding the strict physical standard, the standards were adjusted for the sake of representation.
He calls this the competence collapse.
Yes. He argues we are prioritizing symbolism, the diverse photo op, over actual survival and function.
He contrasts this with SpaceX.
Right, he does.
Yeah.
He points to the struggling Boeing and NASA bureaucracies and compares them to SpaceX, which he argues operates much closer to a pure meritocracy where results matter more than feelings.
Because gravity doesn't negotiate.
Exactly. Riker also links this to corporate boards, discussing the diversity overhang.
What is that?
It's his term for the correlation he sees between companies obsessively focusing on DEI metrics for their boards and a subsequent drop in return on investment.
His point being, when you optimize for diversity, you inevitably de-optimize for competence.
Right. He argues we are currently coasting on the structural competence of previous generations, the men who built the power grid and the internet, but we aren't replenishing that supply of capable leaders.
Okay, so that brings us to segment 3 of the book. The feminization of institutions, and what Riker explicitly calls the war on boys.
This section is particularly intense, especially for anyone raising a son. Riker argues there is a systematic destruction of male rites of passage.
He starts with the Boy Scouts.
Yes, the numbers he provides are staggering. He notes membership dropped from 5 million down to 1.2 million.
And he focuses on the removal of the duty to God requirement, right?
He does. Riker argues the Boy Scouts used to be a machine for turning wild boys into responsible men.
Through structure, hierarchy, and competition.
Exactly. But he claims those specific values, hierarchy, and competition are viewed by modern feminist ideology as inherently toxic or oppressive.
So they get replaced.
Replaced with things like resilience circles and emotional safety protocols. And Riker argues the result isn't a better organization, it's a hollow shell that boys don't want to participate in.
He also mentions boys' state programs being banned in California and Sweden.
Right, banned for gender exclusion. Riker argues that by removing these male-only spaces, society is destroying the scaffolding required for healthy male development.
His argument is that boys need spaces away from women to learn how to interact as men.
Yes. He says when you force mixed-gender environments in every single activity, boys either default to deferring to the girls or they just completely check out.
And Riker says this checking out leads to what he diagnoses as masculine deficit syndrome, MDS.
The boys are retreating. Riker argues that if the real world offers them no path to honor, no tribe, and constantly tells them their natural instincts are toxic, they withdraw.
He points to the screen time data for Gen Z males.
3.6 hours a day on average. Riker says they are finding their hero's journey in video games because the real world won't allow them to have one.
Because in a video game, effort actually equals reward. You can be a warrior.
But in the real world, if a boy acts like a warrior, Riker points out he gets sent to the principal's office or put on medication.
Which brings us to a massive topic in the book, the fatherlessness crisis.
Riker provides statistics here that are hard to ignore. He cites Department of Justice data showing that 72% of juveniles who commit murder grew up without a father in the home.
72%. Riker frames that not just as a correlation, but as a direct pipeline.
And he goes into the biological research to back it up. He cites NIH fMRI studies looking at brain development.
What did the scans show?
According to the book, the studies show that boys raised without fathers actually have underdeveloped prefrontal cortices.
So the lack of a father literally changes the physical structure of the boy's brain.
That is Riker's interpretation of the data. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for impulse control and long-term planning.
So he's saying a father's presence isn't just a social bonus. It physically wires the male brain for responsibility.
Exactly. Riker argues fathers provide the boundary. They introduce the concept of consequences in a very specific way. Without that, he says you get impulse and chaos.
But Riker argues the legal system is actively designed to remove fathers from the home.
He points to the tender years doctrine in family courts, citing statistics that 78% of custody goes to mothers. He calls this a systemic attack on fatherhood.
And he says it's reinforced by culture, too. He mentions momfluencers on social media.
Right. Riker analyzes this content, pointing out how it frequently mocks paternal authority. It frames the father as incompetent, basically treating him as just another child the mother has to manage.
He views this as cultural sabotage that trains children to view fathers as optional.
And then Riker turns his attention to the education system. He calls what's happening there a war on biological reality.
He brings up the Scottish prison case to illustrate this point. Isla Bryson.
Right. Bryson is a biological male and a convicted rapist who was initially placed in a women's prison because he identified as a woman.
And Riker uses this extreme example to talk about what he calls the great pretense in schools across the UK and Canada.
He argues that teachers are being forced to affirm what he terms delusions rather than teaching foundational biology.
Because his point is, if an institution cannot even agree on the basic biological definition of a man or a woman, how can it effectively teach anything else?
According to Riker, it can't. And he argues that's actually the goal. He claims schools are no longer about education, which is the transfer of knowledge.
He says they are about ideological possession.
Yes. He points to a specific course at the University of Wisconsin called the Trauma of Whiteness.
Just the title alone tells you the focus.
Riker uses this to argue that schools are now training camps for a worldview that sees traditional masculinity and biological reality as pathologies that need to be cured.
So if you are a young boy in that system, Riker says you're being taught that your very existence is a problem.
Which leads directly into his fourth segment, the people that these systems produce.
He calls them the NPC class, non-player characters.
It's a video game term, but Riker applies it to a very specific demographic of modern society.
How does he define an NPC in real life?
He says an NPC is someone who doesn't actually critically think. Instead, they just react using pre-programmed loops of guilt and ideological slogans.
Like trans women are women, or check your privilege.
Exactly. Riker argues it's not a genuine thought process, it's a downloaded response.
And he talks about a bot test on Twitter to prove this. This part of the book is wild.
Yeah, he details setting up an automated bot that simply tweeted the old internet meme, "I identify as an attack helicopter."
A completely absurd statement.
Completely absurd. But Riker documents how university diversity officers, actual human professionals, were retweeting it seriously.
Because according to Riker, their programming is simply to validate all identity claims, no matter how nonsensical.
Right. He argues they have functionally outsourced their judgment to the ideology. They can't distinguish a meme from a sacred claim.
He calls this the ideological possession cascade.
And he says algorithms fuel it. He cites an MIT study showing that false news spreads significantly faster than truth.
But Riker frames it more about emotional contagion than just fake news.
Yes. He argues the algorithms reward outrage. They turn this NPC class into people who constantly seek a dopamine hit from moral indignation or canceling someone.
But what happens when someone tries to break that loop? When someone tries to debate them?
That is what Riker calls the erasure of dissent. He declares we are witnessing the death of debate.
He gives several international examples here.
He points to Germany fining a pastor simply for preaching traditional views on marriage. He brings up Canada's Bill C-16, which he argues compelled speech regarding pronouns.
And he spends time on the Wilfrid Laurier University interrogation of Lindsay Shepherd.
That audio recording is famous. She was a teaching assistant who played a short clip of Jordan Peterson in a communications class purely to foster a debate on grammar and pronouns.
And Riker details how she was interrogated by the faculty as if she had committed an act of violence.
Because in their ideological framework, Riker argues, she did. She brought logic and opposing viewpoints into a designated safe space.
He also mentions a University of Texas student who was suspended for making a TikTok parody of a DEI training.
Right. Riker uses these examples to show that silence has become a survival strategy.
He calls it the red-pilled paradox.
The paradox being, the more objective truth you speak, the more socially isolated you become. You risk your job, your friends, your reputation.
So his conclusion is that the rational man has to go underground. He becomes a glitch in the system.
But this is where the book takes a massive pivot. Segment 5 is called The Masculine Reawakening.
Right, so we've covered the autopsy. Now Riker moves from diagnosis to his proposed cure.
He explicitly tells the reader, the world is unraveling, but you are not broken.
He documents this rise of what he calls iron brotherhoods.
And dad groups operating on platforms like Telegram. He gives a specific example of men meeting in garages in Dallas.
What are they doing in these garages?
According to Riker, they aren't out protesting. They've given up on trying to change the school boards. Instead, they are meeting to lift weights and debate philosophy. Locke, Kant, the Stoics.
It's like a modern physical salon.
He says it's about building small, unbreakable, parallel communities of men who hold each other to a strict standard.
And he points to market data to back up that this shift is happening.
Yes, he notes amor fati, the love of fate. Riker explains this isn't just about passively enduring hardship. It's about actively embracing it as fuel.
He uses some controversial figures to illustrate this. Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson.
He does. Riker argues that regardless of your personal opinion on them, both men are masters of amor fati.
Because the system tried to cancel them.
Great. And Riker points out that instead of apologizing or shrinking, they used the friction of that cancellation as energy. They doubled down and capitalized on the attempts to crush them.
So the attack itself makes them stronger. Anti-fragility.
That's his point. He says if you can train your mind to look at the chaos and say, good, this is my training ground, you become incredibly hard to control.
Yeah, and the second part of his solution is radical responsibility.
This is the exact opposite of the victimhood culture Riker critiques. He says radical responsibility means owning every single outcome in your life.
Even if the system is rigged against you, as he claims it is, especially if it's rigged. Riker's argument is that if you blame the system, you surrender your power to the system. You are helpless.
But if you take ownership, if you say this failure is my fault, then you retain the agency to fix it.
He cites military data on this, a West Point study.
Yes, he brings up a study showing that cadets who were specifically trained in Stoic principles maintained 33% higher composure under extreme stress.
Because they focus only on what they can control. And Riker gives a practical starting point for this, the 30-day rule.
It's a strict protocol. 30 days of no porn, no sugar, a daily physical workout, and reading a challenging philosophy book every day.
Which sounds simple, but his point is most modern men are too distracted to actually complete it.
It's an exercise in reestablishing dominion over your own impulses. creating internal order.
He uses a geopolitical contrast to explain this concept of order. Singapore versus Caracas.
Right. He describes Singapore as a place of strict order, rules, and immense safety and prosperity. He contrasts that with Caracas in Venezuela, which he uses as a symbol of chaos and collapse.
And Riker says a man needs to model his internal life after Singapore.
He actually says you need to become the benevolent dictator of your own mind and habits.
He refers to men as the responsibility gradient of society.
Yes. He argues that civilization inherently relies on the silent, uncelebrated labor of men who fix things.
He references the documentary The Last Repair Shop.
To highlight this idea that men are the maintainers, Riker argues they hold back the entropy. And when men are demoralized and step back,
when they stop maintaining the grid, fixing the roads, policing the streets,
and the chaos takes over. He says civilization is just a very thin veneer kept in place by men doing dangerous, necessary jobs.
Which leads us into the final segment of the book, the myth of progress and the future.
Riker challenges this idea that because we have advanced technology, we are socially progressing. He calls it the Enlightenment delusion.
Right, because we are told more information and more tech equals more happiness.
But Riker points to the skyrocketing anxiety statistics, specifically among Generation Z. He argues we have more technology than any humans in history, yet we are miserable.
He attributes a lot of this to what he calls the future female cult, the rewriting of history and culture.
He gives symbolic examples. He notes the British Royal Mint releasing coins that omitted Isaac Newton to feature female pioneers instead.
And the removal of classic male heroes from school reading lists.
He mentions Odysseus being removed for being a problematic, flawed male hero, and Riker contrasts that with modern pop culture.
Like the Star Wars and Marvel franchises.
Right. He argues these franchises have replaced struggling male heroes with perfectly empowered female leads who never actually have to struggle to gain their skills.
Like Rey in Star Wars just instantly knowing how to use a lightsaber.
Exactly. And Riker argues this sends a terrible psychological message. He says strength only comes from struggle.
So by erasing the male struggle from our myths, we are robbing young boys of the blueprint for how to overcome adversity.
We are telling them heroism is just an innate characteristic you either have or you don't, rather than a virtue you have to bleed for.
So where does this leave the listener? What is Riker's ultimate call to arms?
His final message is directed right at the men reading. He says, "You are the immune system of a dying civilization."
He tells them to stop waiting for permission from authorities that hate them.
And to stop trying to fix the captured institutions. He argues that Harvard, Disney, the mainstream media, they are too far gone.
He says to build parallel structures instead. Train your cognitive flexibility.
He outlines what he calls the virtue loop.
Walk us through the loop.
It starts with acting with courage. Riker says courage builds self-trust. When you trust yourself, you have the capacity to act justly. Justice requires immense discipline, and discipline, over time, yields wisdom.
It's a self-reinforcing cycle.
And he says you don't build this by changing the government. You build the new world inside your own household and your own local community.
It's a really intense conclusion to the book. So let's wrap up this deep dive with one final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Yeah.
Based on Riker's thesis, the world isn't ending, it's unraveling. And you, listening to this, have a choice to make.
You can choose to remain an NPC.
Just another face in the crowd, repeating the safe slogans, terrified of being canceled.
Or you can choose to become the glitch in the matrix, the highly rational, radically responsible man.
I think the quote from his epilogue sums up the entire mission of the book perfectly. We are not building a movement. We are reviving a species.
It is a massive claim and a fascinating read.
Look, we have really only scratched the surface of the source material today. We gave you the high-level map, but if you want to understand the mechanics, you need to walk the territory yourself.
If this deep dive sparked something in you, or if you just want to read the arguments firsthand, you need the full training manual.
Right. So go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books today and buy Stoic Wise Adaptation, Cognitive Flexibility, Virtue, and Radical Responsibility.
And once you read it, Riker asks that you leave a 5-star review. He frames it as an act of brotherhood to help the algorithm show the book to other men who need it.
Because the mainstream platforms certainly aren't going to promote it organically.
And make sure to follow Conrad Riker for his ongoing cultural analysis. Again, he is at Conrad Rand Riker on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube.
And finally, if you got value out of this deep dive today, please like and subscribe to our channel right now. It is the only way we can keep bringing you these deep, unfiltered explorations of controversial text.
We appreciate everyone tuning in.
Until next time, stay awake and stay responsible.